Hello.
Oh,
Hey,
right. We're recording. Got it.
we are recording. Welcome to LangTime Chat, episode 25,
Sure, that sounds right.
26,
Sure, that sounds right.
3,800.
No, that doesn't sound right.
Okay, so there's a limit.
There's a hard limit.
Okay. But yes, welcome to an episode of some number in the 20s. I know it's in the 20s because we passed our 2-year mark. So I feel
Yes.
like this should be 26 actually then.
Sounds about right.
Okay, so
Yeah.
welcome. We have had many questions come in. Well, many.
So many.
We've had questions come in about a topic in particular that David knows way more about than I do. And so he's going to be in charge of answering all the tough questions today. If I can think of really good questions to ask, otherwise you're just in charge of disseminating important information. But the topic of the day is Tri-consonantal roots.
That's not how you pronounce that.
No, every time I say consonantal, you're like, that's not how it's said.
That's not how it's pronounced either.
So I think I should be able to say any way I want. So it's triconsonantal.
Nental.
Nental.
Yeah, triconsonantal.
Triconsonantal. That just sounds like it should be a continent instead of a consonant.
Well, that's how it's pronounced. Like, seriously, do you think anybody's saying consonantal?
I don't know. I was saying consonantal and you're like, that's wrong.
It's not right.
And so, and so I wonder, you know what? I'm going to pull up my dictionary.
Consonantal.
Consonantal. Boom. It's in the dictionary as a pronunciation.
But that's wrong. You can't pronounce it that way.
You obviously can, and enough people do that it's made it into the dictionary.
We've been through linguistics. Have you ever heard another human being say consonantal?
Yeah, I just did.
Oh my goodness. Said another human being.
I am multiple people in one.
You are absolutely not. If there's anybody who's less of more than one person, it's you.
Is that the way of saying I'm one-dimensional?
What? No.
Wow.
That you are singular and unique.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to be talking about consonants and what happens when you have 3 of them in a root. And now David is gone. And so David, first and foremost, I want to talk about how not to do this because I happen to remember that McDevie is one of these languages.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I feel like that's a good place to start though, because it's like, I feel like it's also a place that would be tempting for a lot of people to start if they don't know a lot about how the linguistic features work for triconsonantal roots.
So before getting into my opening tirade, let us first discuss our qualifications for this, since I think that they are remarkably similar. Both of us, and you wouldn't know this from Jesse, but it is true, both of us have studied the Arabic language, have we not?
Yes.
In a formal classroom setting, in a college setting. Both of us have.
Yes.
How many semesters did you do?
1.
Okay, so I have an extra semester as you, but really like the first semester of Arabic is like the biggest,
Yes
semester
and
2
no.
just expands on that.
Yes and no. And here's the no part of it. It depends on your teacher.
Okay.
And if
you're a grad student.
And if your teacher can speak the language of instruction. And so I had a very lovely Arabic teacher who, very, very lovely person, and wouldn't want to say a bad word about the teacher, but I was in Germany while I was in Germany, and he didn't speak a lick of German.
Okay.
Or English.
Okay.
He only spoke French.
Okay.
And multiple dialects of Arabic. And so I don't speak French.
Why not?
I don't.
You can get by.
And so what would happen is there would be a lot of repetition that was like just based on the Arabic. And then we had a textbook where we'd figure out what we were saying in German, in Arabic. And And then when he needed to explain points, because it's like, okay, he spoke more than a lick of German, but like, you know, he could find his way around town or order something from a restaurant, but like not like do whole conversations or teach a whole class in German. And so what would happen on like the longer descriptions was he would speak in French, and a student in the class who spoke both French and German would translate into German. And I'm pretty sure I missed a lot of information because this was a student who was not, say, a language student or linguistic student, just someone interested in learning Arabic. And so when you don't know the terms, things get lost.
Jeez. Well, whenever I took a language class, it was done entirely in the language.
Yeah, that doesn't work so well for me.
But that's how they do it.
No, not in most places.
Maybe not in Missouri.
Well, obviously not in Germany either, or at least when I was there. The languages, all the language courses that I've had, when there were finer grammatical points, they go into the language of instruction.
Oh,
and like describe what's happening and find examples so that way you can better understand. Like that's how all my language classes have been, even the ones that were like 90% was in like Spanish or whatever. It would be like, you know, certain days they'd be like, well, we need to talk about this to make sure you're understanding the pattern.
Wow. See, in mine, the only time that they would use English was when explaining the syllabus, explaining when like, you know, the final exam was, or if like class was going to be canceled or something like that. That's the only time they would use English. Otherwise, you know, that's how I learned about le E ouvert et le E fermé. Had a devil of a time figuring out what the heck he was saying. Also, he kept when he was talking. This was David Peterson, by the way, my French instructor, David Peterson, because that happened in my life. When he was talking about nasal vowels, he says like he would say like gymnastique de noiseau et nécessaire, and he would like point to his nose, and for the longest time I thought like nécessaire was like some adjective pertaining to the nose, and I was like, oh no, it's just necessary.
Oh, nice. Okay, so we've sidetracked a whole lot. We've talked about some language instruction and why my Arabic did not stick, except I think the pronoun for I feminine is ant.
Enta is would be the
You.
Yes, second person singular feminine, yeah.
And nt
wait.
masculine.
No, I'm sorry. Enta would be masculine, enti would be
Feminine.
That's right.
And then the word for and was something like wa.
Yep.
Because I remember turning to my classmates and being like, "Wenti," because we had to ask questions like, "And you?" And then you had to say where you were from or whatever. And so I remember that, but also,
how do you say where you're from?
But I don't know. But I also remember that because it's like sounded very similar to I in Chinese, in Mandarin, wa. And so I always.
But I in Chinese was wa.
It's.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's like wa. You know, I change all my vowels.
I thought the vowel was pretty important, though. You only got like a hand. I mean, there's so little going on phonologically in Chinese. Yeah, I get those vowels.
It's spelled with an O in the
pinyin. Okay, but like it's pronounced with a schwa, yeah, right? What?
Anyway, I was just saying it reminded me, and that's why I remember it.
Okay, so.
And I think I needed to say, because at one point we had to do our nationalities, and I feel like American came out as like Ricatun or something.
Not quite. So you would be, you know, Ante Amerikia, yeah?
There we go. Yeah.
And yeah, Anna Amerikiyun.
There we go. See, I remembered like bits and pieces. Like that's I can butcher how to say I'm an American in Arabic, and that's what I can do in Arabic. And then I can turn to you and say, Wenti.
Okay, but now you know a little bit more. How do you say where you're from?
I don't remember.
I just said the word I.
Okay, so Now we get down to the like,
And I'm in California.
I don't hear things and remember them. You know this about me. We've talked about this.
How did you go to a college?
I took a lot of notes and then I studied from all the handwritten notes.
Man, I just wrote down stuff like I did drawings.
Anyway, yes, no, like you would have to like do it 8 times over really slowly and like stress it for me to finally be like, oh, I can repeat and I know what I'm saying.
Anna,
Anna,
Min,
Min,
wherever you're from.
Missouri.
There you go. And I'm in Missouri. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay,
There you
so
are.
well, let's talk about
Okay.
about
All
you
right.
know the whole fact that Arabic was brought up because it's a triconsonantal root language.
Yeah.
And let's talk about why
All right.
you shouldn't go down the Megdevi path
Okay. So
and how to go down a good path.
first, let's go over the basics of it. So, for example, the easiest and most common instantiation of this triconsonantal root system, or at least the best exemplar, is the KTB root in Arabic. In Hebrew, it would be KTV, so katov, that type of thing, because Hebrew and Arabic are the same in this regard. So the thing is, the root, the idea of this being a triconsonantal root is that these 3 consonants will share the same linearity in a bunch of different words that are related to itself. So in other words, you'll see K, T, and B in the same order in all of these different words. Kataba, with a nice short vowel after it, means right. Or it's like what you list as the citation form.
And by right,
and
he means W-R-I-T-E.
Yes, W-R-I-T-E. And in fact, kataba means he wrote in the past tense. If you add a T on the end, katabat, it means she wrote in the past tense. If you wanted to say, I wrote, katabtu, I wrote in the past tense. If you want to say, I am writing in the present, aktub. And so suddenly you still have K, T, and B in order, but you notice the vowel disappeared. So now the K and the T are right next to each other. Aktub, he writes. Yaktub, I'm sorry, aktub, I write. Yaktub, he writes. Taktub, she writes. Taktubina, you write if you're a woman, right?
Obviously.
So we still have K, T, and B in order, but now the K and the T are next to each other. And then the vowels can also change in and out. So we've mostly seen just a short ah. Katib is writer with a long a in there. Maktab would be office. Maktaba would be library. Kitab is book, and now we have a short I in there. Kitab. Kutub is books, 2 short oos in there. And then let's see, I don't know what else. Katabu, they wrote. What are some other words?
Well, like I definitely
Okay.
get the concept about how like the inflections and derivations are all built to the point where you can like have this one root and build a lot of words, which for one thing, as a conlanger, that feels like a very good path to go down, because it's like you just need to pick, you know, these 3 consonants to represent this concept, and you need to figure out the patterns, and you get to plug and play, and that's exciting. You suddenly have like all these extra words that you didn't have before.
Similar to noun classes.
It is similar to noun classes. Evolutionary wise, I understand where noun classes come from.
Yeah.
Evolutionary wise, this seems so foreign for me to wrap my head around about like, well, what was the more ancient word? How, because you obviously didn't just have at some point like speakers being like, wow, is you know, this concept without any, you know, just the KTB by itself, and like how it ended up getting separated like that, and how as a conlanger you can approach that.
Yeah.
Like that to me is really, outside of just being like, okay, I'm going to just create the system and have it created. But like when you want it rooted in like, where did all of these patterns come from? Where?
Yeah. The first thing is that once conlangers learn about this, they tend to get very excited by it and want to jump into it and create it. And that was what I did. This has apparently become a thing now, but I was the first one to do it. And I want to make that damn clear. There are so many people who say, oh yeah, they're doing the whole triconsonantal root thing. Nobody did it before me. I was the very first, damn it. Though I know that what's his face wrote about it in theory. That was, I think, the only previous instance was Rick Morneau wrote about it in theory as a part of his conlang essays. He was like, here is in theory how you might do an Arabic style morphology language if you were creating an auxiliary language, which is why he did it. I was the first person ever to do it for a non-auxiliary language. Sure. And I won't hear anything else to the contrary unless there's documented proof. It wasn't a thing before I did it. I didn't even know what a conlang was before I did it. I just did it. I was just like, I just learned Arabic. I thought it was really cool. I just learned that Esperanto was a thing. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun if I created my own language and then I could do this? So
go on.
That was, I wanted to make that clear.
First, sure.
Instead of all these people being like, oh yeah, you did the usual thing. I did the only thing. I was the first one. Ingrates. I swear.
Moving on.
I don't get nearly the respect I should in the conlang community. This is true.
We have very different approaches to
at least
amount of respect.
At least
expected.
At least you respect me. Yeah.
Okay, moving forward.
All right. So anyway, yes, moving forward. So what I did with Meg Davies, I think the first thing that occurs to you if you look at Arabic and understand the system, because the idea is you get the end point, right? If you start to study the Arabic language, right now, you're seeing the end point of thousands of years of evolution. You're seeing the product of, sound change and reanalysis and people kind of figuring out their own systems for it and figuring out the best way to teach it, because of course their end goal is for you to learn it, right? It's not to figure out how it was built. It's for you to figure out how to use it so that you can actually speak the language, right? And that's a very different thing. And so consequently, if you try to reverse that process, you end up with something like Meg Davy, where you say, all right, so now we're starting a brand new language. And so let's just choose concepts that are mostly broad. That was also another failure in Meg Davy, but not something we'll focus on for this because it's not relevant, but concepts that are mostly broad. And then 3 consonants that are different. And then let's just start making roots. And you can just kind of go from there. You can go with like, okay, water, land, egg, like cooking, whatever. And then you start coming up with patterns and say, okay, if we have a consonant number 1, so consonant 1, 2, and 3, right? And so we'll have 1, the vowel E, 2, the vowel E, and then 3. And that's going to be a place where the concept happens, right? So if you had manak for egg, then minek would be a hatchery. If you had like kabal for cook, then kibel would be a kitchen or a place where things are cooked and so on. And you just go down the line and you do all of this, as many as you want. You say, okay, this pattern is going to be associated with an agent. This pattern is going to be associated with a person who is most likely a patient. This is a place where the thing happens. This is a basic noun. This is a, what do you call it? A participle. Here are all of the verb conjugations, and you just do the whole thing out, and you end up with Meg Davy. And the result is kind of like the Esperantified version of what a triconsonantal root language is. And then if you go on with this idea, you can start branching off to things that are not only unnatural, but almost impossible. So for example, like I started coming up with ideas in Meg Davy for compounds that would actually like switch the consonants from like one root and mix them up with another root and like move them around and then put a bunch of vowels in there.
Chaos.
Yeah. And then like just all these different type of things, ones where you could actually move the consonants out of their order.
Oh,
But it's like you would have to know, like with the leading vowel, that like, oh, this is one where you flip consonant 3 and consonant 1. Like,
why?
yeah, see, this is just something
Why?
that doesn't happen in natural languages, and probably couldn't, because it'd be very difficult to figure out, because we don't actually think of it at that level.
Right.
Like, even though we can schematize it that way, it's not like in your brain you're just thinking, okay, I have this pattern and I'm just mapping consonants 1, 2, and 3 in there, and I always have them tagged with a variable and I always know what they are and I can mix them up. Like, we don't do that. And so if you're making the language that way, it doesn't make sense, and you can't really learn it and use it.
No, it doesn't make sense.
Sorry, I've been feeling like you've been wanting to interject, so I wanted to give you a spot.
Oh, no,
No?
that was just really awful.
Yeah, no, yeah. And so that was the result.
Speaking of respect that you deserve.
Yeah.
I respect your bad decisions.
Thank you. All right. So when it comes to building one of these things the right way, there's a number of things to know. And I think also a number of interesting observations that can be made. I did a similar thing with the, what do you call it? It's another popular one, Tagalog. Oh yeah, the Philippine type, the Austronesian alignment, also called the trigger system. There are many interesting observations that you can make if you just look at the system and just say, all right, let's see what we can find about these. So number one, if you're looking at just Arabic, for example, you'll notice that there are a lot of triconsonantal roots. There are some biconsonantal roots, and then there's like a handful of tetraconsonantal roots, but all of them have explanations. So that's the first thing. They all have explanations. There's a reason that 3 seems to be the upper limit, because in theory, if you have a triconsonantal root system, why not a tetraconsonantal, a quinqueconsonantal, a sextoconsonantal, and so on? There appears to be an upper limit on that type of thing, at least for human processing. If you're not interested in doing a natural language, you could do things like this, but
or a trivocalic root.
Yeah, that was the other thing. That was if you look at Pete Bleakley's Ileana, that one is really interesting, where it's like you can't actually have any words until you combine the triconsonantal root with a trivocalic root, and then you get something. It's not intended to be a natural language. It's a very interesting experiment. He also did a talk on it at LCC 6, if anybody ever finally put those videos together. So,
that was the one in England, right?
It was one of the ones in England, the first one in England, yeah. Okay, so some of the observations you can make about Arabic are you will often see roots where the second 2 consonants are the same. You will never see any roots where the first 2 consonants are the same, unless they're like onomatopoeic.
Interesting.
Yeah. Another thing is that there are restrictions on the types of consonants you see coming next to one another. And it's really hard. You have to just put that broadly, right? Because it's really hard to quantify, but it's also interesting. There are restrictions, especially on the first 2 consonants, as opposed to the second 2, which is interesting because the second 2 will actually come into contact a lot more than the first 2, but that's actually also something else to note. The second 2 consonants will come into contact a lot more than the first 2 will. There are roots where they will, but more often than not, it is the second 2 that will come into contact, right? Or have I got that wrong? Or is it backwards?
I
feel like it's backwards.
Because didn't you say like octave?
Yeah, octave. Yeah, right. I'm sorry. I think it was the first 2 that come into contact. Yeah, never mind. Oh, there's a bird out there.
I've been watching it. It's beautiful, like penguin coloring. Yeah. But it's a little songbird.
I like it when it does its little hops.
Very cute. Yeah. But okay. So so the first 2 consonants are more likely to touch than the final 2.
Yeah. It's also interesting to look at the very irregular ones. because the irregular ones will always have as one of their consonants a semivowel. So, or a glottal stop. It'll be one of those. And so like, they're the ones where you learn where it's like, urid means I want. And then in the past tense, it's ra'ada. He wanted, and it's like, well, what's this crazy vowel change? And it's like, well, it has to do with the semivowel being there, which gives you some indication of what happened in the past. So there are lots of things like this. So then, keeping that in mind, all right, and knowing that it's not just you pick 3 consonants out of a hat. So then it's like, okay, well, what actually happened? The theory is this, that originally there were just words, and these words just had 2 consonants. So what you had was like VC or CVC, mostly CVC, where the first one was a glottal stop or something like that. And then you had a series of suffixal modifiers that eventually got boiled down to a single consonant. In addition, you had a whole ton of sound changes, a whole mess of them. Like, there were some easy ones where that didn't affect anything. Like proto P in Arabic became F, and it just did that everywhere, and it didn't really affect anything. And then it was just like, okay, whatever. But then there were a lot of other sound changes that affected the semivowels, that affected the glottal stop, and that affected fricatives and the liquids. And these in turn affected the vowels around them. So for example, let's say that you have, let's start out with a toy root, something different. How about sak? S-A-K, sak. All right, start out with sak. It means something, all right? Something basic. How about rock?
Sak means rock.
Yeah, sak means rock. That's good. Okay.
I'm seeing if there is a way that we could like, well, I mean, like I could just pull up a document.
Yeah.
But because I thought that might be kind of fun to like map out what we're doing. I guess we can just do a pages document.
Or pull up a note. Then we'll both have it. It'll be easy.
Yeah, because we don't share pages documents.
Yeah,
can I separate like when I make this note so that way it, because I want to be able to share the screen and not have.
What do you mean?
I don't want everyone to see all my notes.
Oh, you want to share the screen?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
I wanted to be able to show them so that way as you're talking.
Do a pages document then. Oh, I'm so sorry. Like I totally didn't understand.
Goodness gracious. Okay, and we're going to make this like size 48 font.
Yeah. All right, suck.
Okay, just one second. Share this screen.
Okay, so it means rock. We're going to start off with rock, all right? And then let's say that you have another like some word or idea that means like small, let's say, and you have noun modifier order, which you do in Arabic, by the way, because this is a head initial language. So let's say it was something associated with an N, right? So let's say that you have this like sucking.
Like that?
Yeah, it means pebble or like small rock, pebble, whatever, right? Okay. Now let's say that you have a pluralization strategy. Okay. And this pluralization strategy, let's say it's derived from something means like pile. How do you say blank of blank in Arabic? Rajul al-jamia. So it's after it. And so let's say that this pile word was like, I don't know, started with an H right?
And it's going to be after, like,
Yeah,
no.
start with rock. Start with rock. And then let's say that you have some sort of a genitive or something in there. So like put a U in between the two of them.
Oh, like here.
Yep. Saku. And then let's say that there was some other vowel associated with this. And so there's just another vowel in there. It doesn't matter what it is. Just throw any vowel in there.
Like
throw an
here?
A in there. Sure. Yeah, all right. And then now let's do like a double space. And let's say that at some point in time, you can lose unstressed short vowels, okay? And that stress goes to a long vowel, and that word final consonants are extrametrical. All right. Sak, sakin. And so, and then sakwa becomes sak, sakin.
Like that.
Yep. And then the next one becomes squah. All right. Okay. Because you can actually do this. There's nothing wrong with that. We kind of have that in English, right?
I have to make this smaller than 48.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to
36.
make it so everyone can see.
Right. Well
When you
done.
do that.
So like we have button in English. There's nothing wrong with that.
I just wanted to make sure I understood what you were saying. That's
yeah.
all.
And so then next thing that might happen is that we don't like beginning or ending a word with two consonants, right? And so we need to just throw in some sort of epenthetic vowel. And so then we get, you know, sakna.
So now we have sak,
Sakna,
sakna,
and asqua. Okay. Now, one thing that we haven't done so far, we haven't done the plural of pebble, have we? So let's go back and take a look at pebble. Now, here's the big thing, and this was relevant for Arabic. What if this derivation, this small derivation, happened after the plural? All right, rather than happening before the plural, okay? Because of course, the idea is that it came from an actual adjective anyway. And so it's not like you're going to pluralize the adjective, right? You're talking about rocks, small rocks, okay? And if you don't have plural agreement at this point, then that small is going to be coming after the word for rocks. And so then it isn't going to get glommed on. So then you have sakwahin, right? And the same thing, we're going to be squahin. No, just squahin.
Oh, yes, because all unstressed.
Yeah. And then now suddenly the plural is something like, let's just say it just doesn't like, you know, HN next to it. And so what's happening is it's just going to drop the H. And so you have asquan with a long ah. There you go. You have sak, sakna, right? So sak is the plural, is the singular for rock. The plural is asqua. Then you have sakna, which is the singular for pebble, and asquan is the plural. Suddenly you're getting something that's kind of like, you know, in winking distance of Arabic. Now let's go back up to the top.
We're going to make this 24. See if we can get it on one.
All right, now let's go back up to the top and let's look at some other things that you might do. S is a pretty neutral consonant. However, N is not necessarily a neutral consonant and I is not necessarily a neutral vowel. So one method you might go here is say the KI becomes ch-I. So you have sak and sachin. right?
Mhm.
And so suddenly, if you just follow that all the way down, you have sak for rock and sechna, or sechen right there.
And then sechna.
Sechna, right? But take a look at what.
So we already changed it.
Yeah, take a look at what happens here. So squahin, let's say that the hi becomes a sha. Squashin. Yeah. All right.
So that would that actually up here?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. And now maybe you don't get rid of that and turn into the long vowel. Maybe you have, asquashna. Yeah.
Guess I should keep what we originally had.
Yeah. So these are just options. Other things that you can do, of course, intervocalic voicing. That kind of obscures the, whatchamacallit, the triconsonantal nature of it, but that's part of the point. And let's see, are there any places where you might, oh yeah, and then of course, like you can already see something that has happened here, right? If you have sachna, but then asquashna, right? There's this palatalization thing going on where it's like suddenly you have the exact same thing like you had with Arabic, ya and wa and ain, where it's like you have to know, it's like, all right, if your medial consonant in Arabic is like a glottal stop, it might show up in crazy different forms in different tenses. And here you have the exact same thing. Now you have this K that's showing up as a cha in the singular. And you have to know that in the plural, it's not going to end up being that.
So just to like kind of interrupt you for a minute.
Please do.
Okay, so going back to this example where we have sak eventually becoming sakna. Speakers at that stage could reanalyze that actually the skn is what makes it rock, and that the in those positions is what makes it diminutive. And so it's like pebble.
That's true.
So they could at that point reanalyze and apply it, especially if there were a lot of roots that like that had like, s whatever, because this is going to happen anytime there's the in, because it's going to be lost, because
right.
So they could actually reanalyze. And then this shows, from my understanding, this is showing why sometimes those triconsonantal roots aren't so regular, because historically they had some other things going on where the I was totally lost, but you don't know that until you go all the way back to a full proto form where it's not it's not actually triconsonantal, it just happens to have consonants. And in fact, here we have 1, 2, 3, 4 consonants.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And then a couple of other notes. So like Hebrew has regular metathesis in predictable places. So that's something that makes it even a little muddier. So for example, we have this word, sakna. They might have decided, well, we don't like, a stop followed by a nasal like that. So we're going to change it to sanka.
Yeah.
And so things like that could happen. But I wanted to start with this example of a diminutive because I think it's very easy to understand. If you go into the history of Arabic, if you go back to Afroasiatic, a lot of these posited root modifications, because there were like 20 of them, are very broad and general. So like you have things that are described as like extensive 1, extensive 2. And it's like, if you start to look at all of the roots of Arabic that have that as a third consonant, it becomes very difficult to pin down a specific meaning for that because it just got so broad. Because what happened is maybe it started off with a specific meaning, kind of like this here. But then let's say maybe somebody thought like, well, diminutive of this is that, and people accepted it. But then there was another analysis
Mhm.
that said, okay, like, these four are obviously diminutive, and like these three are obviously diminutive, and then there's this special one. But I see this other pattern that has this special one as the core member, and then maybe like one from here and two from here. And I have this other idea, and I'm going to make other words based on that makes sense to me. And if speakers accept them, suddenly they're a part of the group. And pretty soon these things, these like third consonants, start to become so semantically bleached that you can't even really identify a single meaning with any of them. They're just kind of like a core concept that just becomes a part of the language now. And because there were so many of them, it was just the way you did things. It wasn't just like, here's this one pattern we have with this one suffix.
Mhm.
There was like 20 some of them. And so it was just like a thing, Yeah.
Go on.
No.
I actually had two
Yes.
follow-up questions.
Go ahead.
One is, of course, like anytime you say triconsonantal root, I'm thinking, like you've mentioned, Arabic, Hebrew, I'm thinking Semitic languages specifically.
But yeah, there's another.
Are there families beyond that people can look to for inspiration in terms of seeing how other language families have developed?
Yes, and there's one in the Northwest of America, and I don't remember the name of it. It would have been great for me to look this up, because of course we've been thinking about this podcast topic for a long time now. It would have been great to look it up. But yeah, there is one, and you actually see the exact same type of thing. I recall seeing a verbal paradigm with it. This was at I think it was this BLS in 2003, where I saw the slides for this. But it's really cool. And actually, that reminds me of something else to add to this, which is there's a better word for this, but essentially rhythm. But there are things that can happen in languages because you're trying to match a syllable count, or you're trying to match a rhythm, or you're trying to match a stress pattern. And you'll actually see that in Arabic. There's an entire verb set where the point is you geminate the middle consonant, because essentially you're looking for the pattern bum bum dun dun, right? So that's another type of thing that could happen, where because you're trying to hit a rhythm, that is motivation for cutting certain vowels, which again, we're going to put these things together, but then it's like, if the vowels don't play well together, then you have to do other things to fix it. Sorry, if the consonants don't play well together, you have to do things to fix it, like throwing in vowels at the end. But the point was, like, if you think that all like your nouns should be bum, right, but you have a fixed stress pattern, then you have to do something to get it into that pattern. Turkish also has a suffix like this, where the suffix is either a single consonant or an entire syllable, depending on whether there's an odd or even number of syllables in the word. And we kind of have something like this in English too, with a certain inflectional pattern that we have when we are incredulous or mocking something, which is that one. And we either lengthen a vowel, lengthen a vowel and like move the tone over if there isn't enough room. So it's like, depending on where the stress is. So Jesse, it's like, you mean Jesse, but let's say that the stress shifted over one. Alone, suddenly there's an entire, the vowel has to be lengthened, and the entire like up down thing has to be moved over, because whereas it didn't for Jesse. For Jesse, it's just high low. For alone, it's low high low, with the high low going over to the alone part. And then if there's more consonants, you can do it. Tallahassee. But you see, like, the same kind of thing.
Triconsonantal.
Yeah, triconsonantal. And notice where the lows and highs were for that. Mechanical, right? so it's that same type of thing. And you can see that with triconsonantal root systems when it comes to like chopping off vowels in order to fit a kind of phonetic or phonological or intonational pattern. And in fact, the thing that reminded me of that was this other language from the Northwest of America.
Let's see if Google can help us.
It has the same thing where you see geminates happening in order to kind of fit an intonational pattern. Let's see. See if you could just pull up the Semitic root Wikipedia and see if it has an example.
Okay, so do you want to keep talking though while I'm looking this up? Because it's probably not so interesting.
Oh man, do they not have it here?
I don't see it. Reference.
Unbelievable. Try this one, Quora. Maybe somebody Northwest Sahaptin?
In Washington and Oregon?
It could be that one. Let
me. Okay. Yokutian, an extinct family in Southern California, have bilateral roots and templatic morphology.
But that's not the one I've seen.
One, Yawelmani, has triconsonantal roots.
I didn't think it was Yawelmani Yokuts. I could have sworn it was something else.
And I don't think I'd have to sign in for this.
Hold on a sec. Let me see who the authors are.
Sharon
okay,
Hargis and Virginia Beaufort. That's all I can get until I sign into a library. And JSTOR has been acting real weird.
You got to use your JSTOR stuff while you can.
It hasn't even been working with the library.
All right.
I've been struggling with that.
Well, the thing that I remembered that was most memorable for me was this root. It was a verbal system, and it was like the root was T angma something else, and was seeing this angma geminate in certain parts of the paradigm, which made me think of it. But I could have sworn that Yawelmani Yokuts was not one, because otherwise I would have remembered that. We looked at it so much because they were studying that there. Anyway.
Well, okay, so
yeah,
as I'm trying to like wrap my head around this, because one, it just seems like, wow, this is very complicated to get such a language. And I will say, I will double down on what I just read on that Quora response, where it's like, yeah, it can happen, you know, yeah, sure, they can happen outside of Semitic languages.
Absolutely.
But they're also very rare. And so I think that's something too, is that, you know, I think one reason why conlangers are drawn to such a system beyond just the fact that, ooh, if I have my template, I can like, you know, do the plug method. But I think it's also exciting anytime you encounter a linguistic feature that's rare, because that makes it fun to play with, right? So I think there are two different ways that if you're a conlanger and you want to create one of these languages, there are more than two, but I'm just going to kind of really broadly lump them into two ways that you could approach making such a language, and you can agree or disagree at will. Agree.
Okay.
But I think one way is to just approach it and say, I'm not even, for the start, I'm not even going to try to make it based in any sort of, you know, protoform or evolutionary form. I just want to see what it's like to create a system that on the surface has a template where you plug in these consonants. And it, again, I mean, nothing wrong with that. It's your language. You can have fun with it. You can see, like, especially, I think this would be a fun exercise for anybody wanting to really force their brains into thinking about semantic connections in bigger ways, in terms of like, how broadly can you define these concepts for like this template equals X, and like, you know, how much fun can you have with with roots that are concrete nouns versus abstract nouns versus, you know, verbal kind of roots versus, like, I think you could end up having a lot of fun just semantically playing with the language to see like how you could get this vocabulary and apply it.
Can I add to that without you forgetting your next thing?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it would actually be an ideal way to create an international auxiliary language. For this reason, if you look at something like Esperanto or a language that's built in that style, there's really not a lot built in for a user to be able to figure out what a new word means. You kind of just stuck with like, well, if I don't know that root, then whatever. Like I can tell that there are some suffixes on here I recognize, but that's really the bulk of it. And not only that, there are a lot of suffixes. Okay. If, on the other hand, you are building an international auxiliary language from the top down and not going to borrow in a bunch of vocabulary, and you want to do it from the start, it's you're essentially giving users a shot to expand the vocabulary on their own, and also for hearers to be able to figure it out. Because it's like, okay, I don't know, I've never heard the word miken before. However, I do know the word makna, and I do know the verb, mukon. And based on that, and knowing the pattern, I can guess what this person is trying to say. And I think it would be a lot easier for people if there was a small set of these, a smaller set of these, all right, a really focused set, to be able to learn them, get used to them, and create their own words and figure out what other words people are saying. I think it'd be a lot easier than an Esperanto type model.
So that's, I think, one way to approach it. Because the other major way is, of course, saying, no, I'm going to do it from the beginning, and you're going to develop and evolve this system over time. But I think what's going to be difficult is like, you're going to need to have a thorough grasp on the phonological patterns you're going to want, a thorough grasp on what phonological changes can end up influencing others down the road. And I don't think you can actually set out, like, you can, like, to me, like, my brain is not wrapping around like, well, how, at what point do I actually have a triconsonantal root system in this language? At what point can I start to abstract the templates out without like me having contrived them? At what point, you know, like as a conlanger trying to approach all these decisions, I think it's much more complex and dirty. It's like the process is messy. And so I think giving just like standard advice for like, this is how you do it, is super difficult. Doable, but like, you're just going to have to put, I think, a lot more time in building up the foundation for what changes are going to happen across the board in your language. Whereas like a lot of times when you start a language, you can have a handful of, you know, sound changes at the outset, and then be like, as you create more inflections and derivations, be like, I'm going to add this in because this is a new thing that I've come across and I need to go back and add it in. I feel like in a system like this, if you go back to add it in later, chaos could ensue. You know, it's not like a late addition of the 31st sound change we're going to have in this language just because we suddenly have one root where these two things come together. I feel like in this, it has to be like, you've got to be really committed to the sound patterns and the intonational patterns, the stress patterns that you're really looking for in the language, and have strategies ready to go for that even before you start generating a lot of roots.
Something that might help if you're going this route, and I think a good way to think of this is that you should separate your language, you know, as you're going from proto-language to modern into different eras, and give those speakers different mindsets. So it's like, you know, your first era is like, all right, whatever, we're sitting at the building blocks, right? The really basic stuff. And then the next thing is you say like, these speakers hate vowels. And so if it's not stressed and it's not long, they want to get rid of it. and they will throw a bunch of consonants together if it means they don't have to say any of these little vowels. They're done with them. Next era, say these speakers hate consonant clusters. They never ever want more than 2 consonants in a row in a syllable. And so then you do stuff because of that. Like you can imagine a type of Spanish that might work this way. So like in Spanish, there's a verb like, cenar, which means to like cook. And, ceno, I cook, cenas means like, you cook and so on. And imagine though, like, and cena means dinner, right? Right. And so imagine though, you have like cena, which is dinner. Cenar is a verb. It means to cook, right? But let's say that like in this version of the language, they didn't like having to pronounce a vowel between 2 consonants when it wasn't stressed. And this was before the C to K change because it starts with a C. And so at one point in time, you had, kena, right? Or it's dinner, right? And gnar, which means to cook. Then you have the sound change happen. Kena becomes sena. Then you have the other Spanish sound change, which is like, we don't want 2 consonants at the beginning of the word, so we throw an E. And so suddenly you have cena is dinner, and eknar is the verb that means to cook. There you go. Like, do stuff like that. But like, try to keep it nice and ordered and like write it down. And by the way, when I say these things, I never do them.
Oh, we know.
I'm just telling you what you should do. Don't follow the way I do it. Like that, like this is the way you do it best, even though I've never done it that way. But it's like, just say like, all right, here's era 1. Here are the words from era 1. Here's era 2. Here's the mindset of the speakers of era 2. Here are the words from era 2 and era 3 and so on and so forth. And just go right on down the line like that and build something up methodically, systematically, and then the end result should be beautiful.
Nice. So keep track of your work. Okay, so all that is to say, like, at some point we need to just like try to show how you could do this.
Oh,
like,
where we
not
actually
right
have to
now.
do the hard part.
Yeah.
All right.
So maybe there will be a part 2 coming of this exploration coming up at some
language.
Point. Well, let's see what next season is before we say that.
Yeah.
All right. So we do need to sign off, though.
Yep.
It is the end. We hope that it has enlightened you somewhat, or given you ideas, or at least helped you understand some of the fun features of these kinds of languages. We hope.
Yep.
And if nothing else, we hope you had fun. All right. So everyone, let me stop sharing so that way I can find my menu again. Hope you have a great month. Happy April, and stay grammar.
Bye, everybody.